The world remembers her as one of the most beautiful women alive, a symbol of confidence, seduction, and success. But Stephanie Seymour didn't always see herself that way. And maybe that's what made her story more complex than it seemed.
People just see the surface, and they don't really go any further than that.
She was in every magazine, on every billboard, in every catalog. And yet, no one really knew what it felt like to be her. The pressure to stay perfect. The grief that shaped her life behind the scenes and the silence that followed it all.
You know, I feel great. I feel confident. But when I look in the mirror, my reflection doesn't always match how I feel inside.
This is not a story about fame. It's a story about what fame costs and how one woman paid in full. Long before the world knew her name, Stephanie Seymour lived a quiet, sunlit life in San Diego. She wasn't chasing cameras, and she certainly wasn't thinking about fame. What she did have was height, awkward limbs, and a restlessness that hadn't yet found direction. Her cousin William would later describe her as all legs and discomfort, growing too fast, too tall, before she was ready for it.
She just had a lot of growing pains. Her legs hurt. She was just tall.
Like so many future supermodels, Stephanie didn't grow up seeing herself that way. She wasn't the kind of girl who looked in the mirror and saw a supermodel. She was shy, unsure of herself, and, like so many teenagers, she didn't quite understand yet what made her unique.
I didn't think I was anything so special. I just had dreams.
But someone else saw it early. Her mother. A woman who loved photography, who had an eye for light and expression, and who believed instinctively that there was something rare about her daughter. She recognized not just her daughter's beauty, but the presence she carried in front of a lens. And more importantly, she believed in her. It was her mother who helped her submit photos to a modeling competition called Elite's Look of the Year. Stephanie was just 14. Thousands of girls applied, but only 70 were chosen. Among them were names that would shape the future of fashion: Cindy Crawford, Hunter Reno, and Stephanie herself. She didn't win the contest. Neither did Cindy. But that didn't matter. Because what mattered was the door, and it had quietly, irreversibly opened.
My name is Stephanie Seymour, and I come from San Diego, California.
From that moment on, everything began to move. By 17, she was signed to Elite. By 18, she was already living in New York and in a relationship with John Casablancas, the head of the agency. To the outside world, it would eventually look like exploitation. But to Stephanie at that time, it was just the next step forward in a world she didn't yet know how to question.
When you're so young like that, you don't even think about it. You just go and you do it, You don't, I wasn't afraid of anything.
What's striking about this part of her story isn't just how quickly she entered the fashion system. It's how quietly it happened. There was no moment where she paused, no space to wonder whether she was ready. Only momentum and expectation, and the silent assumption that she could handle it. She didn't yet know how to protect herself. Didn't yet know that the world she was stepping into wouldn't ask what she needed or how she felt. It would only ask what she could give. And she gave. Because that's what young girls are taught to do, especially when they're beautiful. By the early 1990s, Stephanie Seymour had become something else entirely. No longer just a promising teenager from California, she was now a fixture in the fantasy world of high fashion. She moved between luxury houses like Chanel and Versace with the same grace she brought to a camera lens. Her name became synonymous with beauty, with elegance, with a certain kind of sensuality that felt both effortless and undeniable. But Stephanie's success wasn't just about beauty. It was about how she used it, the way she moved, the way she held herself. the way she used her face like a language only she knew. She didn't just stand there for the camera. She told it something.
She had this innate ability, wherever you put her, it wasn't just to look beautiful, it was to move. So the photographer could keep snapping and he never had the same picture twice.
And most of all, there were the eyes. That's what the photographers talked about the most. Not the angles, not the body, but the eyes.
I think she is an actress and that she will close her eyes and then she'll look up into the camera and she'll look not into the camera but through the camera and beyond the camera.
I think the eyes are very, very one of the most important things in a photograph.
That's what made Stephanie unforgettable. She didn't need to be loud to be powerful. She could hold a gaze and hold a room with just a glance. She understood that modeling wasn't just about beauty, it was about transformation. And no one captured that better than Richard Avedon. With Avedon, it was never about just looking beautiful. He gave her a role to play, a mood, a soundtrack, a character. And Stephanie understood what he was asking, not to pose, but to become someone new.
He was a great director. He always had kind of a backstory of who you were in the picture, and he would bring in choreographers and certain music, so he would set the stage.
In his studio, she wasn't just a model. She became a woman with a story, even if that story wasn't always her own. In the public eye, she was effortless. But behind the camera, Stephanie was constantly working, reinventing herself with every shoot, every season, every glance. And yet, when asked about her runway walk, the one that had stunned so many editors and designers, she downplayed it, almost shrugged it off.
I just have my sexy own little kind of walk, and I don't try to do anything fancy because I'm not a graceful runway girl. I could trip easy.
Stephanie didn't just model lingerie. She redefined what it meant to sell it. Her work with Victoria's Secret came at a time when the brand was still finding its identity, and Stephanie helped shape it. With her, the catalog wasn't just about fantasy, it became intimate and personal, like she was speaking directly to the woman flipping through it, or the man quietly borrowing it from her stack.
From the first moment she hit our pages, the catalog was never the same.
For millions of people, Stephanie Seymour was the first model they remembered. The first face taped to bedroom walls. The first person to make beauty look both distant and somehow reachable. She had become a household name. Not because she tried to be, but because something in her presence stayed with you. She was glamorous, yes. But she was also warm, familiar, even funny. And in an industry built on perfection, that made her unforgettable. But while the cameras kept clicking and her name kept growing, there were things she wasn't saying out loud. Things the industry never asked, and never gave her space to express.
I don't want my career to just end one day. I want it to go on and to mature with it, and to go on and be a spokesperson for something that I believe in.
She was building a legacy. But at the same time, she was quietly learning that fame, especially for women in fashion, comes with an expiration date no one tells you about. And even in her peak years, that knowledge was already starting to settle in the background. There's something the fashion industry rarely talks about. What happens when a woman who's built her identity around being seen decides to walk away? Not because she failed, but because something more important came along. At the height of her career, when her image was still plastered across billboards and catalog covers, Stephanie Seymour stepped back, not in scandal, not in burnout, but in choice. She became a mother. And suddenly, her world wasn't about castings or collections anymore. It was about stability, routine, and being present. She didn't leave fashion completely, but she started turning things down. The shoots, the travel, the endless cycle of reinvention, it all took a backseat to something that finally felt like hers.
I just wanted to have a baby, so I had one. I wanted to have another, so I had another.
For a while, she kept a foot in both worlds, modeling when she wanted to on her own terms and disappearing when she didn't. It wasn't about maintaining fame. It was about protecting what mattered.
I have to choose very carefully what I do and how much I travel because I have 2 children.
From the outside, it looked like she had found peace, a woman who had survived the industry and landed in a life that felt whole. But peace has a way of being temporary. And in 2021, everything changed. Her son, Harry, the boy who had once walked red carpets beside her, who mirrored her elegance, her defiance, her sensitivity, died from an accidental overdose. He was only 24. The loss was devastating, not just to her family, but to those who remembered Harry as a kind of modern muse. There were no public interviews, no statements, just a quiet obituary, and the silence that followed. This was the kind of loss that doesn't make headlines for long, but reshapes every part of a person's life in ways no camera could ever capture. The world may have known Stephanie Seymour for her beauty, but what defined her, in the end, wasn't how she looked under the lights. It was how she carried the weight no one else could see. After more than a decade out of the spotlight, Stephanie Seymour returned to the runway in 2023. It wasn't part of a comeback tour, and she didn't promote it online. She walked in Alaya's show because it mattered to her. He had been one of the first designers to truly believe in her, and this was her way of showing up. She didn't move like someone trying to prove she could still do it. She moved like someone who knew exactly what she had already done. At 55, she wasn't pretending to be who she was at 25. She looked different. She walked differently, but that's what made it matter. The fashion press called it a powerful moment. Not because it was nostalgic, but because it was real. Stephanie Seymour once said, "If I think that Harry would love something, I do it. And it helps." That was how she explained her quiet return to fashion. Not to reclaim anything, not to prove anything, but to feel close to her son. Today, she's not modeling full-time, but she's still present, quietly. She attends select shows, she supports exhibitions, and she's part of the Alaya Foundation, preserving the work of the man who gave her a voice early on. She's also a grandmother now, something she's spoken about with pride. And while she rarely gives interviews, when she does, they're honest, emotional, and rooted in loss. She didn't return to relive anything. She returned to show that she's still here, just on her own terms now.